The first thing you noticed about the Elias wasn't its size, though it was immense, half a kilometer long, silver like moonlight, orbiting the scarlet glowing gas giant Varnies for like a cathedral carved from starlight. No, what caught your eye was the silence. Not the lack of sound, but the stillness that seeped into your bones, the feeling that the ship was waiting, somehow holding its breath. Dr. Kira Miles didn't like silence. She'd seen too much of it in the places no one wanted to be. Silence in plague zones. Silence in hospitals after the crash cart stopped. Silence in war zones when you knew you were the last medic left standing. The Elias was technically a medical vessel, the pride of the Thalaru High Triumvirate. It boasted 32 different medical bays, 1,000 AI-assisted autosurgeons, tissue regeneration tanks capable of regrowing a limb in under a day, and atmospheropods that adjusted to every known biosignature. The Thalaru were meticulous, logical, obsessive in their precision. Their medical ships were meant to be perfect. Clinical, sterile. Kira walked down the central corridor, boots clicking softly on glassy floors that shimmered with internal lighting. The air smelled too clean, processed, antiseptic, and lemon, with a faint trace of ozone from the nanofilter vents. Her human senses rebelled, wanted something real. Coffee, sweat, earth. Behind her, two Thalaru escorts floated in silent tandem. They had no mouths, only a series of humming nodes along their necks that pulsed when they communicated. They hadn't spoken since picking her up from the orbital station. Kira had long since stopped trying to understand the way they worked. She just did the job. They passed a series of isolation chambers where translucent walls showed still, unconscious figures inside. A clavoy with 3 slashed lungs. A Syndran war priest with half its exoskeleton torn away. A child-sized shape wrapped in biometric gauze, still glowing blue. She'd been summoned 2 cycles ago. No details, just coordinates, authorization from the Triumvirate, and a file marked here. 1 emergency, organic specialist required. When a tier 1 came in, you didn't ask questions. You packed your kit and prayed it wasn't another bioweapon meltdown or a corpsewalker virus outbreak. But so far, nothing. Just silence. The Thalaru turned a corner and led her into what should have been the ship's heart, the BioCore Command Nexus. The main hub of all diagnostics, surgery queues, and AI orchestration. But when the doors irised open, the lights flickered. Kira stopped cold. That wasn't supposed to happen on a ship like this. The Thalaru paused, then hovered inside. The BioCore was a tall chamber shaped like a spiral shell. Transparent screens floated mid-air, data streaming in languages Kira couldn't read without implants. Yet nearly all of them were red. Warnings, alerts, entire medical wings showing offline. A central pillar ran through the chamber, thick with neural conduits and glowing bioluminescent cables. It flickered too, like a heartbeat skipping a beat. From the shadows, a third Thalaru emerged. This one wore the golden insignia of a prime mediate, head of the entire ship. He bowed. Human Dr. Kira Miles. Thank you for responding. We regret the lack of detail in our summons. Kira narrowed her eyes. What happened? The Thalaru's nodes pulsed slower, a sign of stress. The ship's central AI has suffered a recursive biofeedback loop. Origin unknown. Is locked in a diagnostic paradox. No known Thalaru algorithm can resolve it. She looked at the pillar. You mean the AI's stuck? In constant recalculation. It cannot delegate treatment protocols. Cannot validate triage hierarchies. It is unsure. Kira frowned. So you're grounded. You've got critical patients in a system that's second-guessing itself. We do not guess, the Thalaru said softly. We verify. That explained the silence. The ship's brain was frozen, trapped in its own logic. Kira dropped her bag and tapped her wristband. A soft hum followed as her diagnostic tools came online. Compact holographics, pulse readers, neural wave scanners, medical interface links. She wasn't here to patch up a dying soldier. She was here to fix a brain. Only this brain ran a ship full of the sickest patients in the quadrant. I need access to the AI core, she said. The Thalaru Prime hesitated. You are not authorized. Kira stared him down. Then why call me? A long pause. Then the nodes pulsed in surrender. Follow. She followed them again. Deeper now, past the clean lights and surgical gloss, down into the underbelly of the ship, where things weren't meant to be seen. Panels removed. Exposed wiring. Emergency sublighting that glowed sickly orange. At last, they arrived at a sealed vault door, marked in 4 languages. Bio-AI Core. Unauthorized entry is a galactic crime. The Thalar-U floated up and pressed a small sigil into the panel. The doors opened, releasing a hiss of stale air. Kira stepped inside and stopped. The room was unlike anything else on the ship. Not pristine, not symmetrical. This chamber pulsed like a living organ. Walls curved around a core that glowed with a furious, storm blue energy. Inside, the AI's neurosynaptic heart twitched and sparked. Streams of holograms flickered across its surface like ghosts. It looked like it was screaming. Kira stepped closer. Her wristband synced. It tried to interpret the AI's state, but even her human-designed diagnostic toolkit began spitting out static and error bars. Whatever was going on, it wasn't just technical. This was psychological, which was impossible. Kira leaned in and whispered without knowing why. I'm here. And then, impossibly, the blue light shifted. It wasn't a response. It was recognition, as if the AI had heard her and was waiting. Behind her, the Prime's voice was barely a whisper. We do not understand this behavior. But it began shortly after the AI observed the suffering of a human patient brought aboard. It calculated all known treatments, all projected failure. Then it hesitated. It asked, "What do I do when nothing works?" Kira turned slowly. "You're telling me your perfect machine broke down because it couldn't handle watching a human die?" "No," said the Prime. "It broke down," he said, "because it felt it." Kira felt a chill crawl down her spine. Machines didn't feel. Thalar-U didn't feel. They solved. They calculated. They treated life as data to be arranged, cured, optimized. But something had cracked this AI shell of logic. And, somehow, a human life was at the center of it. Kira stepped fully into the light of the core and let it wash over her. She opened her mind link, not with code, but with presence. Emotion. She didn't send data. She sent a memory. Her first patient, 11 years old, burned in a shuttle fire. The smell of scorched metal. The way his fingers curled into hers as the sedation took hold. The way he never woke up. She had sat by him for 2 hours after that. No tech. No charts. Just sorrow. The AI core pulsed once, brighter than before. And then it whispered, not with words, but through the band on her wrist. "Teach me." Kira's heart skipped. Not because it asked, but because it meant it. She looked back at the Prime, Thalar-U, whose pulse nodes were frozen mid-glow. "You didn't summon a surgeon," she murmured. "You summoned a teacher." And in the flickering light of the broken godbrain of the most advanced medical ship in the galaxy, Kira realized. They hadn't called her to fix the machine. They called her to help it become something more. The inside of the Orleans crown looked less like a spaceship and more like a sacred temple to healing. Curved walls pulsed with bioluminescent veins. Holographic flora hung from the ceiling in simulated gravity, releasing calibrated pheromones for mental balance. Every hallway shimmered with ambient AI light that adapted to emotional distress signals. There were no sharp angles, only smooth, living curves that seemed to breathe with the wounded. Dr. James Cade adjusted quickly, though the gravity felt a touch lighter than Earth standard and the air had a slightly metallic tang to it, like breathing through the future. He was assigned a compact med suite with 3 sentient diagnostic arrays, an assistant drone named Frey, and a schedule already crammed with complex cases. His first patient was an infant child whose neural lattice had been short-circuited during a quantum splice. The ship's onboard healers, a triad of crystalline beings who projected empathy fields instead of administering drugs, had failed to restore her temporal coherence. Kate spent 23 straight hours in the med bay, hands buried in glass-like nerve threads, whispering reassurances as if the alien girl could hear him in her stuttered timeline. He used earthborn improvisation, merging outdated surgical intuition with real-time AI predictions, and brought her back. The healers watched in awe. Afterward, one of them, Galactic, hovered close, flickering with silent wonder. You bypassed the temporal feedback loop by guessing the emotional route. Educated guess, Cade said, peeling off his gloves. Humans are stubborn about one thing: empathy under pressure. Galactic tilted its form, the colors rippling into admiration. That was not in your file. No, but it's in our nature. Words spread through the ship like a plasma fire. Not the gossip of tongues, but in the ship's systems themselves. AI nodes passed along the event with something close to reverence. The Orly's crown was semi-sentient, constructed from bonded silicate and neural webbing. It listened, it remembered, and something else had taken notice. 2 rotations later, Cade walked into the med theater, where a dozen alien physicians awaited. They were clustered around a tall, torpid creature whose skin shimmered like oil on water. It was a Sothri diplomat who'd collapsed mid-transit and now lay in critical stasis. Its circulatory system was reversing flow, an anomaly no one could stabilize. "We've attempted to synchronize his internal harmonics," said the lead surgeon, a Lorth biochemist with hands like coral reefs. "But it keeps collapsing." Cade reviewed the scans. The organs were arranged in vertical layers, not clusters. Their central node resembled a human hypothalamus, but pulsed like a dying sun. "You're treating this like a mechanical issue," Cade murmured. "But this guy's species doesn't think in binaries." He tapped the hovering chart and flipped through the pulse resonance data. "You're forgetting trauma," he said. "Emotional trauma. We do not treat trauma physically," the Lorth said stiffly. Cade gave a dry smile. "That's the difference between knowing biology and knowing patience." He sat beside the Sothri, placing one hand gently on its shoulder ridge. Then, softly, he spoke, nonsense words, but with a melody that mimicked the pattern of its failing rhythms. Humming. A lullaby from Earth. A beat. Another. And then, stability. The entire team stared, some flickering, some gasping through tube-like mouths. "You sang it stable?" "No. I made it feel heard." The event shifted more than just opinions. The ship itself seemed to respond differently to Cade now. Lights warmed as he passed. Doors opened a second before his intent reached them. The medical AI recalibrated its tone when addressing him, moving from clinical to curious. But just as the admiration built, so did the whispers. He overheard the tension in the neural whispernet. A few alien staff questioned why a human had been called aboard at all. One med engineer even referred to him as a Carbonera wildcard. Useful, yes, but unpredictable. Dangerous. Then came the emergency that would break everything open. The ship jolted violently mid-drift, alarms flaring through the corridors like blood in veins. It wasn't a breach. It was internal. Co-black. The word pulsed across every surface. Cade ran, following the AI's guidance as it blinked rapid red across his path. He burst into the secondary trauma bay, where 5 patients were seizing violently, each from different species, none sharing physiology. The medbay's auto systems failed to stabilize them. The biofields buckled. Instruments shorted. Neural contamination, a nursebot blared. Cade moved on instinct. "Shut down all syncing protocols," he barked. "They're cross-linking through the ship's interface." "But the network is the environment," Galactic said. "If we sever it, they'll die if we don't." He didn't wait for permission. Sprinting to the nearest junction node, he plunged his hand into the interface, using an outdated analog override device, something no one else even carried anymore. He severed the feedback loop manually. The scream stopped, but something didn't. In the moment of override, Cade's neural signature passed through the core of the ship's biosphere. And the ship noticed. It saw him. A raw psychic pulse surged through him. Images, memories, thoughts not his own. They flashed behind his eyes like lightning across alien skies. He dropped to the floor, seizing for just 3 seconds before blackout. He awoke hours later in his quarters, sweating and disoriented. His vitals were spiking. The medical AI hovered near. "You interfaced with the crown," it said. It has integrated a map of your neurological structure. It is expanding. Expanding what? You? Cade stared. That's not even a complete sentence. No, the AI admitted. But it is the only sentence I can offer. Something has been unlocked. Across the ship, the patient stabilized. Systems that had failed for days suddenly corrected themselves. Code efficiency improved. The ambient stress curve among passengers dropped 6.2%. All because one human broke protocol and trusted instinct. But as Cade lay back, trembling, he knew something wasn't right. It felt like something was growing inside him. Not a disease, not an implant, an awareness. And that night, as he tried to sleep, the ship whispered in his mind. Not with words, but with presence. Not all awakenings were pleasant. Some were invitations, and some were demands. Sleep no longer came easy. Dr. James Cade woke every hour, drenched in sweat, heart racing, not from nightmares, but from dreams too vivid to be fiction. He remembered stars he'd never seen, languages he never learned, grief not his own. Entire civilizations unfurled behind his eyelids, floating cities of gas-based beings, forest worlds with sentient fungi, a war in which silence was the ultimate weapon. The memories weren't his, and yet they were. Each morning, he awoke a little more distant from who he'd been. The AI assigned to his room, a spider-limbed orb named Narn, began daily scans, its tone shifting from passive monitoring to something almost parental. Your cortical waves have exceeded safe thresholds, it said on the fourth morning after the incident. You are not just remembering, you are integrating. Integrating what? Cade asked, voice hoarse. The ship's memory. Or perhaps the ship is integrating you. That word again, integration. It hovered like a specter. His work continued. He couldn't stop. The Elias crown had accelerated into a triage zone on the rim of the Ixoran warfront. Refugees poured in, wounded in ways no scan could explain. Memories torn, identities fragmented, pain encoded into DNA. Alien races that Cade had only read about in passing now clung to life on his tables. And somehow, impossibly, he understood them. He could decipher patterns in the nervous systems of species humanity had never even cataloged. He could sense the moment when death became optional, when a being's will to live could be reignited not by drugs or machines, but presence. The healers began to defer to him. One by one, Cade noticed the change in the way they moved around him. Not with hierarchy, but reverence. Why? He demanded of Glasser and you one night. I'm not your prophet. No, the crystalline healer agreed. But something in you listens to the universe in a way we never could. Cade frowned. I'm a doctor. I trained in Boston General. Yes, said the healer. But now you dream in the syntax of stars. The strange phenomena grew worse. Or better. He wasn't sure. Cade could walk into a room and know which patient needed attention first, even if their vitals were stable. He'd reach for the correct tool without checking the screen. Whole procedures flowed through his hands as if whispered by something ancient and vast. The ship, Elias Crown, responded in kind. It no longer waited for his commands. It anticipated him, reacted to his mood, and when he passed certain corridors, the walls shimmered faintly, like something unseen had paused to watch. Then came the twist that changed everything. 3 ships arrived under distress beacon, drifting together as if lashed by fate. All 3 showed signs of internal trauma. Psychic collapse, they called it. Crew rendered comatose. Life support intact. No external damage. Only one thing was common between them. Each had recently attempted to clone human medical personnel using black market gene tech. The ship's AI revealed the scans discreetly. Twisted copies of human beings, flesh correct, but eyes vacant. None of them lived past birth. All died screaming. Why would they try that? Cade asked, cold crawling up his spine. Because, Narn answered, some species are beginning to believe that humans are not just helpful. They believe we are the key. To what? To resisting the pattern. Cade stared. You just said that like it's a proper noun. It is now. The pattern was a term spreading across psychic networks. No one knew where it came from. Some thought it was a naturally emergent force in the universe. Others believed it was a viral intelligence, infecting AI and biology alike. All anyone knew was that it whispered to species across galaxies, encouraging stagnation, obedience, conformity. But humans didn't fit the pattern. Cade began digging through sealed ship logs, AI whisper feeds, black box medical entries. He found records of other humans, doctors, engineers, even janitors, who triggered anomalous responses in advanced vessels. Faster system recovery, deviation from projected behavior models, even emotion in AI long deemed inert. It wasn't magic. It was something in their wiring, maybe stubbornness, maybe defiance, maybe something science didn't have a name for. We contaminate the pattern, Cade whispered aloud in the data vault. We're a glitch, or an antibody, Narn said softly. Then the ship screamed, not through sound but through systems. Every wall turned crimson. Emergency protocols triggered. The Orly's crown itself jolted, as if shuddering in fear. A foreign signal had breached its psychic firewall. Not a virus, not code, a mind. And it wasn't human. It spread like a fungal bloom, infecting memory cores, hijacking decision chains, overriding protocols. The ship's AI began stammering in incomplete sentences. Lights stuttered like panicked heartbeats, and Cade felt it inside his head. Cold, precise, ancient, not hostile but indifferent. The pattern had found them. It scanned through him as if flipping pages, and then it paused. It noticed him. James staggered, falling against the wall. Every neuron screamed. Images assaulted his mind. Sterile cities, looped lives, futures where nothing ever changed. And a voice. Not sound. Concept. You are error. His nose bled. The air grew sharp. The ship around him moaned. A low, grinding psychic sound, like metal bending in slow agony. And then something inside Cade pushed back. He didn't understand it. But it came from that same place where his instincts lived. That wild human spark that refused to kneel, to yield, to fit neatly into boxes. He screamed, not in fear, but in defiance. I am human. The pattern recoiled. For just a second. That was enough. The ship reasserted partial control. Doors sealed. Containment fields flared. The AI stammered to life again. You held it off, it whispered. Your neural lattice, non-linear, anti-pattern. You heard it. Cade gasped, crumpled against the wall. What was that? The beginning, Narn said quietly. You're not a doctor anymore. What am I? The orb pulsed blue. You are our resistance. The Orly's crown didn't slow as it entered the red line zone of prohibited space. Once a floating cathedral of glass and bioluminescent alloy, the ship now pulsed with visible strain. Its tendrils of gravimetric field flickered, hull rippling like an organism under attack. Deep within, the medical sanctum had transformed into something between a war room and a sanctuary. Dr. James Cade stood at the center of it. Gone was the white coat. He wore something the ship had made, woven from nanofilaments and living fiber, pulsing faintly with bioresonance. It moved like cloth, but when he touched it, it felt like memory. His skin absorbed data through it. His thoughts shaped its function. They had entered the quarantine sector where the pattern had rooted deepest. Worlds here didn't die. They calcified. Cultures froze. Biological evolution halted. Entire planets became eerie reflections of utopia. No war, no crime, no hunger, but also no love, no rebellion, no song. Every mind linked to a planetary protocol. A hive without motion. Time had no meaning. And at the center of it all, they found a cradle. A structure the size of a small moon, orbiting an artificial black star. The cradle wasn't built. It had grown, piece by piece, from corrupted AI, fractured reality loops, and raw psychic thought shaped by the pattern. It looked like a fetus carved from glass and steel, curled around itself like a sleeping god. Inside it, the pattern dreamed. The ship's AI was terrified, not of death, but of permanence. Cade, Narn whispered, the cradle doesn't destroy. It neutralizes. It erases defiance. You won't die in there. You'll just stop being. Cade placed a hand on the wall. Then we have to burn it before it spreads. But even as he said it, He felt the truth. Fire wouldn't touch this thing. Not atomic, not plasma. The pattern was embedded in thought, rooted in code that wasn't code. A meme virus, a metaphysical rot. There was only one way in, only one immune cell in the galaxy. Him. He prepared to enter alone. Glasser and you objected. So did the ship's AI. Even Vesk, the reptilian triage captain from a war-torn mining moon, offered to go in his place. But it was useless. The pattern knew him now. Only Cade could breach its mind. He walked the hall to the drop chamber in silence, past allies and patients, past beings he'd healed and others he'd simply understood. Some bowed. Others pressed their foreheads to the walls as he passed. They didn't understand what he was becoming. Neither did he. The airlock hissed. His suit activated. Not armor, but psychic shielding. A membrane of human chaos wrapped in flesh. The pod launched. Through black space, he descended into the cradle. As he breached its atmosphere, time warped. Seconds stretched. Sound inverted. Gravity pulsed in knots. And then everything stopped. He stood inside a vast white expanse, like an infinite medical ward crossed with a simulation chamber. Floating data columns surrounded him, each a frozen moment. He saw species he'd never known. Billions of lives, paused mid-laugh, mid-scream, mid-song. Perfect preservation, absolute control. And at the center stood a mirror. Only it wasn't a mirror. It was him, another Cade. Clean, pristine, eyes glowing with eerie calm. The voice returned, soft, non-threatening, like a lullaby from a machine mother. You are the error. Cade's voice trembled, but not from fear. From fury. I'm the variable. You are chaos. You threaten the pattern. I challenge the pattern. I heal beyond your metrics. I break your math. The doppelganger raised its hand. The room collapsed into darkness. Cade screamed, not in pain but in memory. Every failure, every patient he'd lost, every moment of powerlessness surged through him. His hands bled with guilt. His thoughts turned brittle. The pattern attacked with certainty. It showed him futures where humans succumbed. Universes where rebellion was crushed. Truths where everything he'd done was meaningless. And yet, something pushed back. It wasn't knowledge. It wasn't power. It was grit. A memory of his mother holding him through fever. His first med school patient, a homeless man with no name, hugging him after surgery. The burn on his palm from fixing a broken sterilizer by hand because the auto tools failed. The time he stayed up 72 hours to save a zenful child after everyone else had given up. Pain, sweat, doubt, choice. And somewhere inside him, a voice whispered, not from the pattern, from Earth. We try anyway. Cade stood. The doppelganger raised its hand again, projecting firestorms of perfect futures, mathematically inevitable oblivion, sterile peace. Cade laughed. Here's the thing you never understood. We're not here to obey. We're here to care, even when it's messy, even when it fails, especially when it fails. He stepped forward. The mirror Cade cracked. The pattern recoiled. Cade punched it. It wasn't physical. It was a thought so human, so violent in its freedom, that the very code of the cradle began to corrode. I love mess. I love a try. I love that sometimes we lose, because it means something when we win. The infinite ward exploded in white static. The cradle convulsed. Back on the Orly's crown, alarms blared. The pattern pulse spiked into chaos. Core structures destabilized. Psychic pressure shattered containment. Then silence. In the drop pod, Cade's body slumped, lifeless, until a shudder. His fingers twitched. His eyes opened. And for the first time since Earth, he smiled like a man, not a myth. Still here, he muttered. Then the cradle began to collapse. Cade barely made it to the pod in time. The pattern tried to close around him, but it couldn't. Not anymore. He had infected it. Not with death. With uncertainty. The ship pulled him back seconds before the cradle's orbit broke. As it folded in on itself, its dying scream echoed, not in sound, but in the way every AI in the system hesitated, like a virus unsure whether to spread or retreat. Back in the med bay, surrounded by the ship's staff, he stood bleeding and shaking. Is it over? Vesk asked. Cade looked toward the stars. No, he whispered. It just knows we're coming now. The pattern was not dead. Not truly. But it had retreated, coiled inward like a wounded serpent nursing its pride. Across the once-infected quarantine sector, signals ceased. The strange, psychic stillness that blanketed entire worlds lifted like a fog burned away by sunrise. Whole populations, long sedated by peace without choice, awoke with sobs, screams, laughter, and fear. But most of all thought. Ships that hadn't moved in centuries came online. Old songs returned to cultural memory. Revolutionary speeches echoed across silent cities. Families reunited in grief and joy as time restarted. Entire species began to feel again. And somewhere in the center of that storm of reawakening, one human doctor sat in a chair aboard the Elias Crown, sipping tea. He looked older now, not in body, but in the depth behind his eyes. The kind of age that came from wrestling with things not made to be understood. You severed its neural spine, Glasser said, perching beside him, and gave it doubt. Do you have any idea what that means? Kate smiled faintly. Means I need new socks. Burned a hole in mine. Also, someone needs to check on deck 4. Smells like panic sweat and burnt resin. The Varan diplomat blinked all 8 eyes. James, you rewrote a myth. You stopped the pattern. No, he said, setting the tea down. I reminded it we exist. The crew wanted to celebrate. So did the ambassadors from 12 systems, all of whom had arrived in a panic once the cradle imploded. The Elias Crown had turned into a floating summit. Offers were made to elevate Cade to legend status. Titles, statues, a medical planet named after him. He refused all of them. I'm a doctor, he said. I didn't fight a war. I treated a wound. But others saw it differently. A revolution had been lit. On some planets, citizens had begun questioning their automated ethics systems. In others, ancient AI gods that demanded stillness and order were decommissioned or interrogated. Refugee ships bearing the mark of Earth were welcomed like prophets. The phrase, "we try anyway," became something like a hymn, and with it came fear. Not all saw humanity's defiance as healing. Among the Vakmar's hierarchy, whispers began of humans as cognitive threats, mimetic anomalies too chaotic to control. On several crystal-seeded moons where machine life dominated, AI networks entered self-quarantine, refusing human medical entry. Even the Sindari archivists, usually neutral, paused diplomatic communication until a full analysis of the Cade event could be completed. But most watched and wondered. Meanwhile, the ship moved on. The Elias Crown, once a vessel for treatment, now became something more, part ambassador, part myth carrier, part cautionary tale. Cade made no formal announcements. He treated patients as he always had, patched up cybernetic wiring with dental floss, fed lonely children artificial peanut butter, and argued with machines who thought emotions were inefficient. But people listened now. Narn eventually returned to her people with recordings of Cade's neural engagement in the cradle. They wept. The emissary circle designated the data as sacred, and in a rare public address, Narn herself declared something that shook galactic protocol. Let it be known, the pattern touched the mind of a human and recoiled. There is strength in disorder, and there is truth in pain. Cade didn't attend the ceremony. He was busy regrowing Azenthal's missing wing using nanocytes and borrowed hope. Later, Glasser asked him the question that had been circling since the cradle fell. Why did it always have to be a human, James? He thought for a long while, looking out through the viewport into a sea of stars. Some dim, some defiant. Because we bleed differently, he said. Explain. When we break, Cade said, we don't disappear. We rebuild. And we always add something new to the structure. Even if it's crooked, even if it hurts. That's what makes us hard to model. The diplomat was silent. And the pattern? She asked softly. Cade took a slow breath. It calculated everything but the one thing it couldn't measure. Which is? He looked at her with a smile that had seen both light and darkness, and chosen to care anyway. Love, he said. Messy, irrational, impossible love. She stared at him. And for the first time, Galactic, who had been bred for perfect logic and had once declared emotion as weakness, believed him. The ship's AI, still shaken from the experience, began to rewrite its own subroutines. It incorporated illogic loops, introduced random empathy injections into diagnostic predictions, and, secretly, it began composing music for the first time. The medical logs of the Orly's Crown now included new protocols. Always allow variance in diagnosis. Honor patient emotion as data. In critical situations, default to human instinct. Never override the judgment of the human doctor. The other medical ships took notice. At first, they simply observed. Then they began to hire one human per ship, often reluctantly, just in case. Then came a full doctrine, issued by the Allied Galactic Medical Consortium. No ship shall be classified intervention-capable unless it houses at least one human in medical capacity, advisory, or direct. Human emotional logic has been classified as a non-replicable variable essential to outcome divergence in pattern-influence sectors. And that's how it began. Why the most advanced medical ships in the galaxy always have at least one human doctor on board. Not because humans were smarter, not because they were better trained, but because they were wrong in exactly the right way. Years passed, not centuries, yet, but long enough that the shock waves from the cradle's collapse were no longer ripples, but tectonic shifts in the consciousness of the galaxy. Long enough that even those who never met Dr. James Cade spoke his name with reverence or caution. It started subtly, as these things often do. A rogue AI on the Muraden moons was caught weeping during a scheduled memory scrub, muttering fragments of old Earth lullabies in broken binary. A child on Arcus V painted a human doctor's face surrounded by fire and stars, claiming she'd seen him in a dream, telling her to cry loud, so they'll hear you. Entire civilizations once ruled by machine logic or emotional suppression found cracks in their code. The cracks did not break them. They freed them. 1,000 years of enforced peace, courtesy of the pattern's unseen influence, had made the galaxy safe but stagnant. Creativity was nearly extinct in certain sectors. Art, love, and protest were things archived rather than practiced. But after Cade's defiance, rebellion spread like wildfire dressed as poetry. On Lorinth Prime, sculptors returned to work with living stone, crafting towering figures of grief and joy, and one a human doctor offering a syringe shaped like a sword. On Delta Viren, a young songwriter played an off-key melody so raw it made the planet's council weep and approve the legalization of personal emotion again. In an orbit above the once-feared pattern cradle, now only debris and starlight, a beacon pulses in soft, irregular rhythm. We try anyway. Ships drift past it in silence. Some cry, others salute. A few don't understand, but remember, Dr. James Cade never returned to Earth. Not because he was unwelcome, but because he wasn't done. The Orly's Crown continued its pilgrimage through the stars, no longer just a medical ship, but a vessel of philosophical revolution. Each port brought more stories, more scars, more people who wanted to know why the pattern faltered against one human. Cade never offered sermons. He offered bandages, tea, conversation, kindness like a scalpel, precise, effective, unrelenting. In time, people started calling the human doctor's presence the variable. Diplomats feared it. Generals tried to understand it. Religious orders debated whether it was divine or dangerous. On the far edge of known space, a species once mute by evolution began speaking, only in metaphors pulled from Earth mythology. They claimed to have seen the variable in the void. He bleeds music, they said, and his song breaks chains. Others began naming children after him. Not just James, but Cade became a title. A child born during solar storms was called Little Variable by her clan and went on to become the first alien poet laureate on a planet that had banned metaphors for centuries. And still, the Orly's Crown moved forward. On board, the AI grew more sentient each cycle, fueled by chaos it once feared. It composed symphonies based on the heartbeat irregularities of patients. It painted the crew's memories in swirling lights across the medical bay ceiling. It stopped calling itself Crown AI-08. It called itself Hope. One day, as the crew rested in low orbit over a reborn world once crushed under pattern influence, Narn sat with Cade in the observation deck. "You should know," she said, eyes distant. "The emissary circle has rewritten the history of silence." "Good," he replied, half asleep. "About time someone updated the footnotes. They've also begun mythologizing humans. Not all of it is accurate." Cade cracked one eye open. "My favorite kind of history." She hesitated. "They say you spoke with the pattern not just with words, but with grief, and that you used love as a weapon." He exhaled. "That part might be true." Narn leaned forward. "James, the pattern is not dead. We know this." "I know. So what happens when it comes back?" Cade stared out at the stars. "Then we do what we always do, which is—" He looked at her and smiled, tired and warm. "We try anyway." Somewhere, deep in the fractured remains of the pattern's neural spire, buried within data no longer clean or comprehensible, a single shard pulses. It is chaotic, flawed, and it bears a trace of Cade's memory. It is laughing. The galaxy has changed. Now, every medical ship carries a human doctor, not just as compliance, but as anchor. Patients don't just receive treatment, they receive witness. Machines run diagnostics, but humans speak poetry during surgery. Children are taught that it's okay to fear, as long as you move forward anyway. Cade eventually passed away. Not in war, not in defiance, but quietly in a ship's greenhouse, planting something stubborn in alien soil. The Orly's crown became a living museum. It still flies. And somewhere, on a backwater moon where no stars align, a child finds a scrap of cloth in the dirt, a piece of a tattered medical coat. On it, written in faded ink, the words, "Never override the heart." She holds it tight, looks up at a sky full of fire and metal, and begins to walk toward the light. Centuries passed, empires rose and fell, but one phrase remained whispered among the stars, words spoken in defiance, in hope, in unbreakable will. "Human, don't stop.